the presentation slides in PDF, and I do have a couple of other handouts and resources as well. So we're happy to push all that content out after the event today. So what are we talking about? I've prepared some topics of discussion. However, I really want to learn what you guys want to talk about. But I'm going to talk about best practices for hiring, kind of introduce you to what I see top talent and top clients doing with hiring, and some interview best practices, which is always kind of a sticky one, is, you know, how do I know whether someone is the right fit before I make such a leap of faith for my business? Hiring contractors, that AB5, which has been a huge topic of discussion throughout 2020. So we're going to spend some time talking about that. On the topic of 5, we're going to talk about 5 as a magic number, and you'll know what I mean as we get a little bit further through the presentation. We're going to talk about firing do's and don'ts. However, if it's not applicable, we can blow past it. We don't have to talk about any of this stuff if you're not interested. And I want to talk about some crystal ball predictions for what the next 6 months and year look like, which once again, I'm not a fortune teller. So we can have a fluid dialogue about that, but it will be very interesting to see what the future holds economically, legislatively, as well as just for you know, the state of things right now, given we're in such mad times. So before we move into the material I have prepared, I wanted to have you chat in if you have any burning questions on your mind. I may answer them as we go through the materials, but if my materials don't include it, I want to make sure that we talk about it. So if you have a question at any point in time, chat it in. I've got the chat box open, but right now, open forum. Let's take 30 or so seconds, and if something's on your mind, throw it in that chat box. I'll make a note of it, and we'll make sure we cover it today. All right, I don't see anything coming in, so have a sip of coffee, get your brain juices going. Something may come to mind as we start moving through the material this morning. So I want to start with one of my favorite topics, which is some hiring best practices. And I get asked all the time, you know, what do I do when I'm ready to make a hire? What does that look like? Well, a couple of best practices. Oh, good. And someone wants to know about screening candidates. Good, we'll talk about that. One of my first best practices is follow a process. It sounds really simple, but all too often I work with clients that say, you know, well, we don't really have a process for hiring. We find someone or we get referred someone that, you know, is a friend or a family member because we just were busy, we needed help, and we didn't really follow a consistent process. Or I've got 2 people on my team, and one of them I gave a background check, the other one I didn't. One of them went through a 2-interview process. The other one was just kind of my friend, and I just hired him onto the team, especially with younger companies that are just getting off the ground. So my first piece of advice sounds really simple, but it's create a standard process. And on the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that best practices process can look like and how we've implemented that for some of our clients, and you may be able to template some of that. Another thought is know what you want before you start the process. All of these things sound super simple, but sometimes we get so caught up in the weeds that it's important to look at the forest for the trees, if you will, and really take a holistic look of what do I want before I undertake a hire. I know I'm really busy. I know I'm overwhelmed. I know I need another body in the chair, but what exactly does that look like? And so a couple of questions that you can ask yourself is, number 1, what's the number 1 problem that I want solved by adding a person to the team? Because that's why we hire, right? We need to solve a problem. So we're bringing in a people resource to help us alleviate a problem. So what is that problem? Maybe it's administration. Maybe it's we need a grant writer. Maybe it's, you know, our accounting process is a little bit squirrely and we need to get that nailed down, but really narrowing in on kind of that one thing. If this role could do one thing and do it really well, what does that look like? And then expand out will really help kind of narrow the options. Especially when you're in a small business, we're all wearing a lot of hats and it can be really challenging to try, you know, jack of all trades, master of none, as the phrase goes. So really narrowing in on that. Options. Benchmarks, super important. You may find someone and think this is the one. However, I always recommend 3. There's a book called The Coaching Habit that by Box of Crayons. It's brilliant. One of the things he talks about is the psychology of three. And there are, if you pay attention to the market, companies play this psychologically also. Like In-N-Out Hamburger, they have three options, right? The double, the single, and like whatever their third thing is. Haven't been there in a while, but nonetheless, anything more than four and our brains just kind of short out, like, that's just too many. And two is kind of an either or decision. However, if we give ourselves three options, it's kind of this magic number to kind of figure out what our options are and make a positive choice. And when I say that, I mean three solid options for the role, you know, not two duds and one person that you really want to hire, especially if you're putting them in front of a group of people. But the importance of benchmarking, right? So you kind of know what else is out there in the market. Know your secret sauce. This is super important, and also I think glossed over a lot with companies, is what makes you special, what makes you different than the next guy? Why would somebody want to come to work for you? And I see we have a couple of not-for-profits joining us today, which is awesome because mission-driven organizations have a leg up here against other companies. You know, I work a lot with construction companies. Like, well, what makes you different? Well, we build cool stuff. So does everybody else. So what is it? You know, mission-driven organizations can say, well, we're changing the world through, you know, helping children get exposed to the arts. I'm just making this up. And how are you doing that? And how are you presenting that to the market that can get people excited and have people align with your mission, right? People leave jobs, not usually because of money, but because of a malalignment with the mission or the culture. So if you can get that right up front in the hiring process, you're already ahead. Lastly, ABC. And this is knowing our ABCs is gonna be a little bit of a theme throughout this presentation. In this case, ABC stands for, does anyone know? Always be closing. And if anyone has seen the famous Alec Baldwin movie and scene, always be closing. And what I mean by that is hiring best practice is to close at every stage of the process. So after a screening interview, are they prepared to take an offer? After an in-person interview, are they prepared to take an offer? This is a best practice because you don't want to get to the end of the line, go through all of that time, all of those steps to hire someone, multiple interview with other people from your organization, deliver an offer letter, and then they don't take it. So I'm not going to go into the bits and pieces of what that means, but ABC, always be closing at every stage of the process. There are no surprises at the end of your hiring. Any questions, comments, or open discussion before I move into what a common hiring cycle might look like?
I was going to ask earlier about, can you hear me?
Yeah, a little reverberated, but you're good.
Thank you. I was going to ask earlier about the, just thinking about having to reinvent the wheel around the hiring process, but I was excited to hear that you were going to share some of that with us. So I'm looking forward to that because that's definitely something that our organization is looking to figure out in terms of processes. And I know that a lot of other organizations that are growing are as well. So if we don't have to reinvent the wheel and come up with that, it'd be great to see other ideas so that we can create our own template that works for us.
You don't have to reinvent the wheel because I have a wheel right here for you. It's the hiring cycle. And this is kind of a best practices approach for how to move through every step of the hiring process. So it starts with, hey, we need to hire somebody, right? Someone left, or we are reaching a pain point, or we have a problem that needs to be solved and we need a person. So the first thing that we need to do is define the value. And this is super important. I put this at the front of my hiring cycle on purpose because, as I say in my organization, we don't want to let the tail wag the dog. We don't want to get to the finish line and then ask the person, well, how much do you want? You know, how much is it going to cost? We want to know what is the value of this role in the marketplace for what the services are. For example, you know, somebody that's going to come in and file paperwork is not going to be paid $150,000 a year because the value of that labor is not worth $150,000 a year in the open market, right? Nobody else is paying that. So it's important to figure out, okay, well, is that $15 an hour? Is that $18 an hour? What is the value for those services? So once we know that up front, I kind of think about hiring as like fishing, and I'm not a fishing person, by the way, but I understand you put the bait on the hook. So we need to figure out which pond we're fishing in. We need to put the right bait on the hook, and we need to go to the right lake or ocean, right? But I hear all the time, well, there's no good people in the market. Like, well, if you're fishing for ocean marlin, you're not going to find them if you go fishing in a lake, right? So the salary is a really important starting point, so you know which lake you go fish in. And so that you kind of have the parameters and you're in control of the process. So after that, we identify the need. And that's where we say, okay, what is the number one problem that we're trying to solve here? What do we really need? And we might brainstorm, what are all the problems that are happening and where are all the breakdowns and what are all the things where we're overwhelmed, and let's put it all on a piece of paper and group it into groups and figure out what exactly this is, because it might not all fit into one job description. And so there may be some market research that goes into that as we're figuring out, well, what exactly is this role? What, is this a marlin or is this a bass or a trout? Then from there, we're going to write that job description. And so that might be an internal job description. It might be a forward-facing ad slick where we talk about our secret sauce and we take it to the market and say, look at all the cool stuff we're doing, and here's what you get to do here every day if you're a part of our organization. Make sense so far? Cool, thumbs up. Then we move into, all right, now we know what we want. We know how much we can pay for it and how much it's worth in the market. We've done our homework. Now we got to go fishing. And that's where sourcing comes into play. We got to go find these people. And unless we want to take a deep dive into that, we could spend, a whole half day just talking about all the strategies of where you find people. Like that's a part of why I have a job. This is what we're good at. But for the time being, let's pretend you've gone out, you've found them, and now we're moving into that selection process. As an aside, pipelining. Pipelining means always be sourcing. So pipelining is, I don't have a need right now, but I'm always going to be interviewing because I'm growing and I know I might need an additional role. So I kind of I'm doing this process all the time so that I don't have, a 2 to 5 month cycle to find someone. I kind of have a bench of candidates. So pipelining is fishing for pleasure, not for hunger, I guess you could say. So nonetheless, we've sourced, we've found a pool of candidates. Now we're moving them into the selection process. Selection is a process that involves the interview process, right? So what does that look like? I guess I should have another little arrow that kind of blows this up into what selection could be. I like to start with, we always start with a phone interview. This is kind of your 30-minute intro to, hey, candidate, what's your ideal salary? What are you looking for? And how does that line up with my budget and what I think the value of this role is? Why do you want this job? What's your mission? And talking more about kind of what their background is and where their motivations are. This is your 30 minutes of time, or 45, where you make a decision about whether or not they're a candidate that can advance into an in-person interview. I never have candidates move into in-person interview until we've done a phone screen, because that, it can be a 10-minute call right away. Oh, you're looking for way too much money. Yeah, that's outside our budget. I'm sorry, it's been nice, but we can't move forward. All the way through, yes, I'm really excited about this person. And that's how we get options, but also protect your time, which is your most important asset, right? I had a question from Laura come in about talking about screening candidates. So I'd like to know a little bit more about, from Laura, what exactly Laura is looking for there, and we can come back to that too. But Laura, feel free to chat in if you have specifics there, or we'll revisit them at the end of the presentation. So once we've gone through the selection process, be that a phone interview, a multi-interview in-person process, maybe we're using a personality index, maybe we're administering some kind of writing sample or a test, or we're doing reference checks, all that lives in selection. Then we move into that offer letter phase where we put something in writing that says, hey, I want to hire you. Here's for how much, here's when you start, and here's all the legal stuff, right? They accept it. We go through negotiations. Maybe there's a background check, a credit check, a drug test, a driving record, whatever you need to do to mitigate risk. And then we have their first day. And then as the company continues to grow, we repeat the cycle as we expand, or if there's a replacement, back we go again and around in the wheel. Make sense? Awesome. Okay, Laura's given me a little bit more clarity on phone screening. Using time wisely as a lone worker, screening can take a lot of time for specialist roles, i.e. developers and designers, especially where we get hundreds of applications. Yeah. Again, this is part of why I have a job, because it is a filtration process. My best advice there is to go back to your needs identification and developing the job description. If you get really, really abundantly crystal clear on those pieces, usually you can filter out those hundreds of applications into less applicants. You can also use tips and tricks like SEO optimization, keywords, tagging it in the right places and getting it on the right platform to kind of narrow down how many applications you get. But yeah, it can be really laborious to sort through all of that. You've got kind of 3 screens. Your screen when you look at the resume and you make a snap decision about whether or not they passed the initial smell test. Then you've got your phone interview screen, which is hugely time intensive. And then you've got your in-person interview, which is even more time intensive. So pre-screening questions, Laura, if I could give you a piece of advice, is develop those upfront based upon what exactly you need and that number one problem you need to solve, and ask that first. And also vet out salary right away if it's a sticky spot. You can also create an email template, send it out to all applicants in a batch and ask a couple of questions and have them write back. Thank you so much. We received an overwhelming response for this job. Have a couple of questions up front for you before we talk about moving into a phone interview. What's your price point moving forward? I'm just going to make this up. Are you willing to travel to Elk Grove to come into the office every day or be on site working with kids, or can you pass a background check and something else? Maybe one of those things you're also looking for is how quickly did they get back to you and how professional did they present it? If they wrote it on their cell phone and it's full of errors and speech to text issues, that might be someone that doesn't put attention, they're not putting their best foot forward for the first date here, so to speak. So you can use that as kind of a tricky between the lines way to get a writing sample from somebody. But then on your own time, glass a wine in your PJs, you can go roll through those pretty quickly and kind of put them in the good pile and the bad pile. So I love Outlook signature pickers, and I believe Google has this as well, where you can template a signature and then just pull down the signature and boop, fill it out and send it off. It's a great way to send bulk emails and can create some efficiencies. Cool. Okay, so we've talked about the hiring cycle, and we can come back to this again at the end of the presentation during open forum. But I'm going to move into a little bit more about AB5. And I was thinking about what picture do I use for AB5? And this was the only thing that really resonated, was just someone that just looked super confused. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the background of AB5, why in the world they did it in the first place, some of the impacts, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the changes. So as you all probably know, January 1st, 2020, a new law came into effect that changed the game for independent contractors versus employees. So I guess we should have known when this happened that 2020 was going to be off to a rough start. But nonetheless, the reason why they did it, so it was the gig economy law, right? Assembly Bill 5. The reason why they did it, the original intention was to say, hey, if we've got workers who are working 40 hours plus a week for a company, but are not protected under FMLA or other leave laws, are not receiving benefits, and are not receiving other, the benefits that an employee would have, 401k, et cetera, hey, that's not really fair to these folks. They're hardworking as well. They're contributing just as much. They should be employees too. The other side of the coin there, of course, is the tax implication, to make sure that the government is collecting the property tax, or the, income taxes on that. So it's easy to be mad, but also know that there was some positive intention around worker protection. So I get it. But as is typical with the government, a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't always really work. And so it poses some complications sometimes. And, here we are off to the races. And there's also a lot of costs associated with making someone an employee versus an independent contractor from the employer side. And that cost is typically about 30%. So that can take somebody that's a $60,000 a year worker and throw them over $75,000 a year in impact and cost to the employer, which is tough, right? So I wanted to chat a little bit about the why behind this, because it is easy to vilify these kinds of things. And I think it's important to know, you know, this is some of the good intention that was surrounding this. So we're going to talk about our ABCs again, but in this case, it's not always be closing. It's the contractor and AB5 test, which essentially says you got to pass this 3-part test in order to be able to be considered an independent contractor and not an employee. And so what that looks like is it basically all comes down to control. So you're free from control and the direction of the company. So I can come and go when I please. I'm using my own equipment, and you don't really get a say-so over what I'm doing outside of what we've agreed upon in our scope, which I helped put forth. Secondarily, the person that's performing the work is outside of the normal course of business. So for example, I do hiring and recruiting. If I hired somebody to do hiring and recruiting, I'm not allowed to call them an independent contractor because they're in my same scope of business. But if I'm a house painter and I hire someone to come in and install an electrical outlet on a wall, that's not what I normally do. So they don't have to be my employee. They can be a contractor. And thirdly, the person is customarily engaged in an independently established trade or occupation or business of the same nature, which basically means it's a separate entity. So really this all comes down to control. And you probably already know this because we've all been reading a lot about this all year. But the key is this control factor, that if the employer has control over the materials, the product, the timing of when it's produced, how it gets done, we may run into a problem. So the good news is that there's a whole host of exceptions. Oh, first, the rules keep changing, right? Because 2020 just keeps giving. But this one was good. So AB 2257 just happened in September, so not too long ago, which basically expands exemptions. So when this came out in January, it was a bomb. And in January, they said, well, some fine artists are excluded, but they didn't give clarification about what fine artist meant. They didn't say, is it performing artists, stage actors, singers, dancers, musicians, choreographers? We don't know. There's been a lot of speculation about that, and the legislators in California have come out and said, yeah, we intentionally made that undefined because we wanted to leave that to EDD to figure out. But obviously EDD has been a little busy this year so with everything going on. So they haven't had any movement on that. So here we go, 9 months later, here comes a new exemption that says, okay, we're going to specifically carve out artists, musicians, comedians. I said musicians twice. Look at that magic trick. Whoops. Songwriters, publicists. It's okay to call them all contractors. And then for media, we're going to expand these kind of arbitrary rules we had where you used to only be able to do 35 pieces of work a year. And now we're not going to make you count that anymore, and you're free to do your job. So I'm not going to read you all these slides. They're super, super dry. But like I said, the information is out there. We'll get this to you after. Here's a list of the exemptions, which for the most part scoops out creatives, with that caveat with fine artists that still kind of remains to be seen. Any questions about this? Katie McCleary let me know that this may be a hot topic that we'd be talking about quite a bit. So I was prepared for the hard questions.
I would just say
Awesome.
that I had just a comment, I guess, just in our field. I think a lot of us are looking at teaching artists or instructors that we have come in and do workshops and trying to figure out what category are they in with all of those changes. So yeah, I think it gets really tricky, but I think many of us work with people who are presenting just short-term classes or workshops.
Yep.
Any,
And again, that ABC, oh, go for it.
I was just saying, if you had any thoughts on that, on what category they fit in after all the changes this year.
Well, once again, caveating, I'm not an attorney, but one of the loopholes that I've seen this year is if you're a separate entity. So if you have your own EIN number, even if you're a sole prop, or you can, easily set up an LLC, then you're exempt, because then you're no longer an individual, you're now a company. And so I've seen a lot of independents do that and create a pass-through, which is a little bit of a headache up front, but then you have to send an invoice, you get paid, as a business. And so it's what's called a W-9 form. You don't get a 1099 as an independent contractor would, and the problem is solved. If it's under $499, you don't have to file a 1099 either. So if it's for low dollar, then that is another way to, have it fly under the radar. Although the legalities of that, I'm not so sure. I do know that the fines and penalties for breaking the rule are pretty high. I know they're between $5,000 and $25,000, but I also don't think that this is the hottest thing that the Department of Labor and EDD is real worried about right now. So I think it's something to be aware of and to talk with your counsel and your CPA about, frankly, and see kind of, what makes the most sense. But it seems like the legislation threw an umbrella over everything without thinking about it, well intended to protect the government's revenue stream and to protect workers. Huge backlash, obviously, with Uber and the ride sharing folks. And then all of a sudden went, oh crap, let's backpedal and create exemptions because we didn't think about all this other stuff. Of course, with the proposition, was it 22? That now gives the gig and rideshare workers the ability to stay independent. And so we're migrating more towards an approach that works for everybody, I hope. A soapbox moment, I'm of the opinion that we really should be able to let people choose. I think that if you consistently work more than 32 hours a week for the same company, even like Uber, you should be able to be granted rights as an employee. I don't think it's fair that they aren't. If they're doing the same job that people that are employees are. So I don't know why they didn't just do that, but whatever.
Katie?
Yes.
Do you mind repeating the dollar threshold you said for the 1099?
$499.
Okay. I had thought I had heard higher than that, but you're the expert. Is there a difference between a 1099 miscellaneous? I'm reading EDD's website and it seems to suggest the threshold is 600.
Is it 600? Maybe it's $599. So you are probably right. And I am giving you bad information. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I just wasn't sure if there's a difference, if there's like two types of 1099 or if there's some nuance I'm not aware of.
I know there are a couple and I forget in which case you use which. The 1099 reporting requirement is for any subcontractor or third party that you do business with within your, I don't remember if it's calendar year or your company's fiscal year. So if someone comes in and just does a little side project for you for $100, you don't have to file that paperwork for them. But I think you're right. The threshold's $599.
And that's for the whole year or per incidence of that?
For the whole year. So if you had them come in once a month at $100 a month, they're over that threshold and you have to file that paperwork.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And in that instance, if they're doing the same exact job as everyone else on board, it's probably easier to put them as a temporary worker in your payroll system and pay them by the hour rather than paying them under the table. Well, don't pay them under the table. That's breaking the law, right? Or as a subcontractor, if you have any question about whether they would fail that ABC test.
Okay, so if it's a one-time thing, like someone comes and like does some yard work for $100 once, you don't need to do a 1099. Correct.
Are you in the yard working business?
No, but we have a facility where we occasionally will have someone like come do a random odd job.
Yeah. You know. That's an independent contractor for sure. I mean, they're bringing their own rakes and shovels.
Yeah.
They're, telling you when they show up. Even if it was over that threshold, you just have to file that form at the end of the year.
Okay.
And if you have an accountant or a CPA, you'll start hearing about this probably next month. They just started doing this a few years ago, but it's a huge project for accountants to gather up, you know, where did all the money go all year long? Who needs a 1099 miscellaneous form? How do we have to report it? One copy goes to them, one copy goes to the government. It's a big rigmarole, and it just happened a few years ago.
Okay.
So that is different than classifying somebody as a, you know, an independent contractor under you within your own company.
Okay.
Katie, you just mentioned a temporary worker, and I know on ADP, I see it as a category. What does that even mean?
What does that even mean? Well, it depends. The typical HR answer. It can mean that you're only bringing them in because there's, you know, a maternity leave, and you know when you bring them on board that they're not going to stay forever. It depends on how your offer letter is structured and the agreement is structured. So most oftentimes it's a temporary leave of absence, or maybe it's a special project where you bring someone in as an employee to help with something, knowing that there's an end date in mind.
What is does it mean that like they don't qualify for benefits, or like what's the implication for an employer if the person is temporary versus just a regular employee?
It depends how the offer letter and the contract is set up. However, I think the biggest advantage for an employer is that it creates a protection about whether or not, so if I hire someone and I structure it as a temporary arrangement for 90 days, at the end of those 90 days, if I don't want to hire that person, I can say, okay, your contract is up, see you later, without any implication. If I hire them as a full-fledged employee and after 90 days, they're not doing a good job and I want to fire them, well, now I've got to talk about that. How do I fire them? Is that for cause? Is that, you know, for not cause? Is it a layoff? Are they eligible for unemployment? And what does that do from a risk perspective for my organization, for, you know, from the perspective of letting them go? So one strategy with a new hire might be to create a temporary position and then have an option to convert them over to a full-time employee after 90 days. The sticky wicket there is that somebody gainfully employed might not want to leave a full-time job to take a temporary opportunity with no guarantee that there's a full-time light at the end of that tunnel.
Thank you. I asked a lot of us receive federal funding that only lasts through the end of the year. We might get some again next year, right? But it really is challenging when you're thinking about employees and versus contractors and bringing them on full time. So it's good to know that that temporary category is, yeah, I had no idea. I'm like, what does that even mean? What are the implications if I, you know, do that? But it sounds like it's something that you have to be very clear with who you're employing at the beginning, and you set up a contract so it's very clear the length of employment that they'll be getting.
Yep, absolutely. And then under those circumstances, okay, it's December 31st, our funding didn't renew, your temporary engagement is up, we're not offering you an extension. That's completely different than having to fire somebody or lay somebody off, and from an unemployment perspective as well.
I wish I would have months ago.
I think everyone's getting an F unemployment rating this year because of COVID anyway. So like I said, the EDD is going to have their work cut out for them for a while.
Thank you.
All right. Again, if anything else pops to mind later, we can revisit this. Otherwise, I wanted to talk a little bit about some interview best practices. So I have one of my favorite, I was going to say people, but I guess that's not true, entities, Yoda, to talk about interviewing best practices. If there's one piece of advice I can have you walk away with from interviewing people, it's use the interview as an opportunity to gather market data. It's never a waste of time to interview somebody, even if they're not a fit, if you find out what your competition is doing or what everyone else in the market has going on. So for example, maybe somebody is interviewing to be a grant writer and they've talked to 4 different not-for-profits. You can find out, to the extent that you can build trust and they will tell you, how much are they paying? What does that opportunity look like? What does their benefits package look like? You know, the more trust that you build throughout that process, especially if you've started a relationship early on in that hiring cycle, you've already had a phone interview, maybe you've already corresponded via email, you've built some rapport. Now, by the time they sit across from you at the table, hopefully you can have a pretty easy dialogue and you can find out some of this super valuable information that you can bring back into your own organization to say, you know what? All these other companies that are in the same space that these talented individuals are interviewing for are also offering pet insurance for their dogs, and it's really popular. Maybe that's something that we should talk to our broker about. I'm totally making this up. But things like that that can help you evaluate what's going on and keep a pulse in the market. Once again, ABC, always be closing. I can't reinforce this enough, but making sure that when they walk out of the interview, if they're the person that you want to hire, you know that they're going to take your offer, or you have a backup candidate. Because the last position that you want to put yourself in is going through all of that and then having there be a malalignment in the 11th hour that results in someone getting offended or something not. I don't like surprises. Nobody in hiring and recruitment likes surprises. So I didn't want to barrage you with takeaways. I think we could do hours and hours just on interview alone and talking about, aligning questions with those needs and those problems, making sure that you're speaking to core competencies, kind of the art of getting people to tell you things. I don't want to overwhelm you, but if you want to talk a little bit more about this, certainly we can do that. So chat in your questions and we'll chat about it. Cool. All right. Firing do's and don'ts. Couple of them. Less is more. So I say this to mean be careful what you say. I work with, especially some of my not-for-profit clients, maybe there's someone that's been there a really long time. COVID was not kind to us, related having to figure out, who has to stay and who has to go. We had some hard days earlier this year. The best thing that you can say is, your position has been eliminated, or we've made a decision to let you go, or whatever your one line is, and thank you so much for your contribution. We wish you the best. Don't explain. It can open you up for a legal exposure and also create hard feelings, and it's better to just keep it pretty clinical. Secondarily, and the HR folks on this presentation already know all this, I'm sure, but document it. Obviously, if there's a performance issue, that needs to be very well documented. Everybody signs it. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, well, do they know they're not performing? Well, we stopped talking to them and inviting them to meetings 2 weeks ago. Like, okay, well, that's probably not going to get us there if they, take you to court for wrongful termination. So let's write it down on a piece of paper and make sure we have them acknowledge it as well. Or the step up from that, well, we sent an email that said that they, missed these deadlines and showed up late and were drunk at work and didn't do a good job. Okay, well, did they acknowledge it? Because they can come back and say, well, I never knew this. And if you've ever been through a lot of terminations, you can probably, this will resonate. Oh yeah, they're surprised. What? I didn't know any of this. Nobody told me that I wasn't doing a good job. So having that paper trail it's unfortunate. No one likes to do it, but is part of the job. Final paycheck needs to either be on their last day, or in this remote environment, we have a little bit more of a grace period. If we're not physically able to, process the termination in person, we can get it to them within 48 hours. So that's important also, just so we're not breaking any rules. Any other specific questions about terminations? Nope. Hopefully no one ever has to do these, and we'd all be happier for it. Katie asked me to share the most important piece of advice that I have, which was a hard one. I think the most important piece of advice I have in general always is to have a good process and consistently follow it. Processes are not a perfect science. They're designed to be broken. They're designed to fail so we can redesign them and make them better, but have a process so you know what you're working with and there's some baseline. The most important piece of advice I can give during these crazy times of COVID and otherwise, is really to know who your A players are. Take an inventory of your team and know who your A players are, and make sure that you're investing in those folks and keeping them engaged and giving them attention. There's that famous phrase of give 80% of your attention to your top 20%, right? I think now more than ever, that's really important, because virtual is a bummer, man. It is hard to keep everybody on task and engaged, and your cat's in your lap and your kids are running around without their pants on screaming, and it's just crazy. And so getting, our tendency, I think, from a manager perspective is to want to wrangle everybody, and then your attention gets divided in a million different ways and might go to some of your bottom rung. Make sure that you know who your A players are and keep them. Because we will eventually come out the other side of this thing, and we want to come out intact with our loyal team with us. So that's my biggest piece of advice, and something I've seen happen over the past couple of months is why are we worrying about that person? He's probably going to quit in the next 6 months anyway, or we're going to terminate him for non-performance, or we'll hire over him. But that gal, she's really solid, and we need to make sure that we're investing in keeping her. Couple other secondary pieces of advice: pay attention to non-essential tasks so you can hold on to your cash. This is the accountant in me coming out, but I think when times are good, it's easy to focus on non-essential tasks, or it's easy for us to get really busy and focus on the minutia, but really kind of paring down what your essential functions are so that you have an ROI on your human capital. And I guess also just keep going, just keep trudging, keep doing it even when it's hard. Compliance. Just a couple things. This is super dry, and I know we have some HR folks on the call that probably already know this, but I mentioned 5 as a magic number. I think there are some folks on this who have 5 or more employees, so already know this, but 5 is kind of that tipping point magic number, where now in California, once you hit 5, you are required to have anti-harassment prevention training. So that was a new law, SB 1343. Employers with 5 or more employees have to provide sexual harassment training. So that needs to be done by January of next year. So if you have 5 or more employees and you haven't done any sexual harassment training this year, you got to get cracking on that so you can get it done by the end of the year. And there are lots of resources online or in person or otherwise that can make, or virtually, that can make that easy. Supervisors have to have 2 hours, everyone else has to have 1, but you got to do it and you got to have it documented. A handbook also, 5 is kind of that magic number where you need to have that handbook and have some things documented. If you're under 5, it should be on your radar as one of those, like, okay, well, if you're at 4 and you're planning for growth, let's start getting our ducks in a row or line up some resources who can help us before we get over the threshold and all of a sudden we are out of compliance. And then some other magic numbers. If you're at 1, and I'm not talking about yourself, but if you have 1 employee outside of yourself, depending on if you take a draw or you put yourself on payroll, you need to have all those required notices posted. So, in your break room, if you're in a physical space or in your office. A question about that I got recently was, what if I'm in a co-working space? Check with the building, because typically a co-working space will have those notices posted in a common space, so you're off the hook there. Or if you're in a Regis as part of a bigger building or something like that. 5, we talked about that, handbook and sexual harassment training. 15 is where EEOC compliance kicks in. So that is your anti-discrimination and harassment stuff. Under that law, I'm not, be mindful of that, but there's not as much risk. So that's good news. 50, your FMLA law kicks in. So things get, like, when you're at 50, it's a whole new ball game. It's a whole new level of scaling. Some exclusion to that is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act is subject for employers less than 50. So it's a little bit of a caveat to the FMLA laws, but there, of course, are exclusions depending on economic necessity and blah, blah, blah. So the other one is 100, and I just put the whole enchilada because it's pretty much everything at 15, plus a whole bunch of other stuff. Zenefits, and I'll give you the link when I send out the presentation, but they have an awesome chart on their website that shows at different thresholds what every stage of the game looks like and what all of your compliance requirements are. Hopefully, if you're at 50 or over, you've outsourced this to someone else who can help you manage this headache. Cool. And as I mentioned before, compliance is not really my jam. I do enough of it to have to, but I really like the hiring and business growth side. So we'll just blow right past compliance and talk about some common mistakes that you may be making. So these are some common things I see in the HR and hiring realm. Misclassifying exempt versus non-exempt. Super, super common. So what that means is if you're exempt, you don't have to keep a timesheet. I pay you a salary, you can kind of come and go, you know, you get in at 7, 8, one day, 8 the next day, whatever, you put in your hours, you're paid a salary. Non-exempt is different. Now that means you're eligible for overtime. I pay you by the hour, and you need to come and go on, you know, I need to keep track of when you're coming and going and make sure you get a lunch break and you're taking that time that the government requires that non-exempt employees take. So this is tricky because the state of California has specific thresholds around the dollar amount that someone has to make in order to be considered exempt, which is 2 times minimum wage plus a little bit extra. And it also depends on your county, and Sacramento and San Francisco are, you know, like independent states practically. So they have different rules than the rest of the world. So the minimum wage here is a little bit higher than it is in San Francisco, but that threshold is around like 62,500, I want to say, at the high point. Oh, and of course it also depends on if you're in the 5 employee, if you're, you know, 20 or more employees, or if you're over 25 employees. So pay attention to that. If you're hiring someone and you think, oh, well, you know, they're an admin for $50,000 a year, but it's going to be exempt and I'm just going to pay them a salary, you're probably out of compliance. So it's something that you need to think about when you structure your offer letter. And it does mean keeping a timesheet. You may be subject to paying overtime, things like that. This is huge. I can't emphasize this enough because risk, right? You hire someone, you say, oh, you're exempt, $50,000 a year. They're doing a bunch of work for you. They stay late a couple times. All of a sudden, something goes sour. They find out, wait a minute, I should have been classified as non-exempt and I should have been paid overtime for that time. Not only are you on the hook for that overtime, but you're also on the hook for all kinds of back pay and fines and penalties for misclassification. So that is bad news bears. You do not want to have that happen. Not keeping adequate records, also a common mistake. It's easy to get caught up and not do it. And I mentioned before, you know, not having two-way transparent communication. We don't want surprises. And not having documented policies. That's a given, and it goes back to process. Any questions about this, or specifically with exempt versus non-exempt?
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm not following. Is the exempt versus non-exempt, is the first distinction the amount of money they're getting paid, or is it the first distinction their job function? Like, to give an example, we're a really very, very small nonprofit that's had, our executive director who founded it. She's been working for free for 10 years, and with grant money, we've finally been able to pay her, but we can't pay her a lot. And she's not getting paid for the equivalent of a full-time job. So I would guess that it's under that threshold, but she's certainly comes and goes. She's the executive director.
Yeah, great question. And a point that I forgot to make. It's both. So there are certain rules that are automatically carved out from exemption requirements. If the position, and I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but more ABC type tests. If the person is in a position where they're making management decisions or they're in charge of other people, then there are, you know, you can lean towards exempt. And I forget if the salary also kicks in, or if there's a carve out in a situation like you're describing. If they're in a role where they're not making decisions, they're not managing other people, and they cannot independently perform their job duties, for example, like an accounting assistant or any assistant title position outside of an executive assistant, which is more high level, then they're going to tend to probably be non-exempt.
Okay.
Where I see the fail come in is people that are classified as exempt and paid a salary when they're under the dollar threshold and they're in an assistant role where they need guidance to perform their job duties and they're not in a management role.
Okay.
And they're improperly classified as exempt when they should be non-exempt.
So we're perhaps classifying our executive director as non-exempt, right? Non-exempt is hourly. Is that right?
That is correct. Non-exempt is subject to overtime pay.
Okay. Even though she is a manager and very independent.
So she may very well be allowed to be classified as exempt, even though her hourly pay is lower because she is at a high level. I can't remember off the top of my head, and I would have to get back to you about that.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're figure out if we're in a position where we're set up for that fail that you're talking about. Yeah,
I mean, and there's a bunch of different ways that you could slice that one.
Okay.
Someone could be considered exempt on a flat salary that is lower than the threshold if their job duties are, commensurate with high-level management functions. I don't know if there's an exclusion for CEOs, but there is for like doctors, accountants, a couple of others. And it could just be under a flat fee salary that's just lower than being, a higher dollar salary on a part-time basis.
Okay.
So yeah, I think you're probably okay there, but it's worth looking into just to make sure. Where this is more of a sticking point, again, is those lower level folks that are misclassified as exempt. We're looking at risk, right? Where's the risk? How do we mitigate the risk? The risk is, oops, we were supposed to be paying overtime to people and we didn't because they were misclassified. And now we're going to owe a bunch of back pay and have to pay a bunch of fees because we misclassified people. Somebody at an executive director level that's working part-time, that risk is, does that exist? It sounds like it's very low.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Crystal ball predictions. And this changes all the time. I predict that we will see more clarification on that AB5 rule to get more clarity on gig workers. But I also predict we're going to continue to see more Proposition 22s, if you will, and pushback from certain sectors of the economy that say this doesn't work for us. So 5 years from now, that all may just go away and it may have just been a huge failed experiment. I don't know. Or maybe we'll migrate more to a model where we find a different way to give workers those protections under, an hourly threshold. I thought that when COVID hit, we were going to see a huge uptick in available talent, and the labor pool was going to get very wide, and employers were going to have their pick of the top talent, and we were just going to see this huge popcorning of people. That has not happened at all, which was really interesting to watch. The labor shortage has continued to be a constraint for companies, and it seems like, at least in the ponds I'm fishing in on a regular basis, it's gotten more difficult. So what does that mean? For employers, it means always be looking for talent, the importance of pipelining for growth, and it means that we may have, we may be paying, it may drive up salaries. Because it's good news for candidates who are employed and looking to make a move. They have leverage because things didn't shake out the way we thought they would. I think also we're going to probably see more emergence of the arts and the trades. We had such a shortage, especially in the trades as a career path, because folks went to college when the economic downturn happened. Now I think, why would folks go to college if they are paying out-of-state tuition to sit in their living room and take classes online? Why not just wait it out for a few years, follow a passion, or get into the trades? And so we may see an uptick in the labor market there. That's my prediction, but I really don't know how that will shake out. So I'm curious what you guys all think is coming.
I think remote working is going to become a norm for so many different employers. And I think that causes some, questions and complications around how you categorize people, how you track hours, how do you ensure people are taking breaks and doing all of these things? How are you posting information where you would in a regular workplace? Are you doing this digitally now? So I think it's going to create a whole new, a whole new way of restructuring the way that we've been doing things on site. So that's what I'm trying to figure out, because I do see a trend of more and more people moving into remote working. For example, my sister works for the state, and they were just told that they're probably going to remain working from home for the unforeseeable future. They are not even having them planning on coming back at any point. So that's really interesting in terms of all these things we've had to do on site, how we now permanently transfer that to a remote working situation.
Absolutely. That's a great point about going back to that exempt versus non-exempt. If your employees have technology and they're using it at home and they're considered non-exempt, you better have ironclad policies in place around, if they're checking their email at night and using their computers to do work, because that may get you into a sticky situation if they returned an email one night, even though they weren't paid for it, and then it ends up becoming a challenge. So the importance of that handbook and policies and procedures, all that dry, unfun stuff. Laura said more work on well-being support. It's interesting that Laura mentions that. I went to the Facebooks yesterday to poll my hive mind about wellness programs, because I want to see more companies do, remote marathons and Fitbit challenges and ways to keep people out of high-risk categories and healthy physically and mentally with all the challenges going on in the world, so that we're not just blobbing out in front of our computers. I'd love to see more of a let's go for a walk and talk meeting, and not let's have a Zoom happy hour and drink in front of our computers in our living room. Not that I've not gotten really good at that, but I'd love to see a shift, and I want to be a part of that movement. So it is very interesting to see what comes down the pike. So open forum discussion, and I do have an answer. I did a little quick search. Exemption for executive employees under the Fair Labor Standards Act, which governs the exemption and non-exemption. There is an executive exemption for a bona fide executive, which I would imagine that your executive director qualifies, as long as she is paid not less than $684 per week. So I can send you this Department of Labor fact sheet about the executive exemption. That might give you some helpful starting points.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Actually, can I put the chat? This is going to be too techy while we're talking. I will somehow get this link over to you.
Chat you my email address if that's helpful.
Perfect. That'll help. Does anyone else have any questions? I told the gals that this was not going to be a 2-hour presentation, that I probably had an hour worth of yakking to do, and then this was going to be for you guys.
Any other questions out there? This is your time to shine, to get them out there. We'll give it a few seconds, Katie.
Not a worry. And I have resources to send. So after the presentation, if you have some burning thing, like you're in the shower where all my great thinking happens and you're like, oh, wait a minute. There we go. I have my contact information here. So my website's here. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm a big book nerd. So I have on my webpage a reading list just of fun, mostly business books, to Katie McCleary's chagrin probably, because she's such a literary guru. But if you're looking for your next read while you're stuck in quarantine over the next few months, check it out. Someone had a last minute question about recommendations for reading up on AB5. I will connect with you, Amanda, after the presentation. The Department of Labor is a rabbit hole that you could spend all day jumping down. So there are some FAQ pages that can be helpful. A little light reading.
I don't have questions, but I definitely created a to-do list for myself from this presentation on things I need to go back and just see how I could have some people classified, and updating our handbook to include remote working policies. So I left with a to-do list.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much for giving me a little bit of your morning. Have a super great holiday wherever that may find you. And let's be in touch. Let's connect.
Thank you, Katie. Appreciate your time and your knowledge.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.